The second session of the 2023 Ohio State University Extension Beef Team's Virtual Beef School was broadcast via Zoom on February the 8th. The evening's program focused on improving fertility and getting cows bred. More specifically, to lead off, OSU grad student Crist shared her research during her presentation entitled Presynchronization and Improving Fertility of Beef Cows. Following that, OSU Extension educator Dean Kreager presented on Estrus Synchronization while utilizing natural service. Listen in here as Garth Ruff introduces Dean Kreager and his presentation, Synchronization and Natural Service, during the second segment of the evening's program.
Dean's got his screen pulled up here, and maybe this is one extreme to the next as we think about how synchronization can play a role in getting cows bred in a timely fashion. What Alex talked about with pre-sync, certainly there's a cost there in terms of labor, and takes a little bit of forethought in terms of timing, calculating when we want to breed that cow, back to starting that program. I asked Dean to talk about Estrus synchronization and natural breeding programs because I think that's kind of the introductory level to utilizing synchronization protocols and really trying to tighten up a calving window and improve the uniformity of calves. So I'm going to turn it over to Dean Kreager. Dean's the Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension educator in Licking County, but has a long background in the world of reproduction. So Dean.
All right, thank you, Garth. That was really interesting, the information Alex was giving. It'll be interesting to see how some of that research turns out to kind of help tighten up some of the synchronization programs. But when Garth approached me with this topic of talking about estrus synchronization and natural breeding, I thought it was interesting because usually we're looking at trying to include artificial insemination in there. But there are a lot of things to be gained, even if we aren't taking that extra step and going with artificial insemination. And so I want to concentrate on some of that today. You'll notice on here, a lot of this hasn't been talked about much recently, but we happen to have another educator who was talking about this at a couple of meetings, Brooks Warner. So I pulled him in and we worked on this together a little bit. Then I'd also like to give Dr. Alvaro Garcia Guerra some credit because you're going to see some of the slides in here that are from some work he's done, and just wanted to make sure that was mentioned that he was involved with that. So, all right. So I'm going to start off just with some statistics. So every 10 years, there's a national beef survey that's completed. The most current one was in 2017, and they look at all kinds of information on management of beef herds. And some of this information I thought was pretty interesting. When we start looking at beef cattle, they found that 7.3% of all of the beef cow-calf operations use synchronization programs. And so that seems pretty low to me. I wasn't overly surprised, but it's pretty low. If we start looking at herds that are under 50 cows, that drops clear down under 5%. And just as a kind of a comparison, if we start looking at farms that do artificial insemination, even there, we're only looking at 8.7% of those that are using synchronization. And just to kind of let you know where that people in Ohio sit, the average cow herd in Ohio, the average beef cow herd is just 17 cows. So a lot of the information that we have in Ohio is based on some pretty small herds. So the next question is, should I consider synchronizing with natural service? So we've got positives and negatives to talk about. And one of the positives, and Alex mentioned it in her presentation too, is we can shorten the calving season by using some of these protocols. And there's advantages. I'll be spending a little time talking about those advantages. We also can trigger normal estrus cycles in non-cycling cows. At least you can't do it in all of them, but you can definitely increase a percentage of those cows that are going to cycle in a timely manner using the synchronization programs. These next couple points I have, these are kind of compared to if we were doing synchronization with artificial insemination. There's actually a couple advantages of doing it with natural service as opposed to artificial insemination. And one of those is that there's some research showing that there may be a biostimulatory effect by having the bull present. There's been quite a bit of research done with that in hogs and sheep, with the boars and the rams being around. But there has been a little bit of research done with bulls also. Without artificial insemination being included, we don't have to worry about the heat detection, so we can eliminate that need of time. We also don't have to have an AI technician or get trained in doing AI ourselves in order to take advantage of these synchronization programs. And if we do these synchronization programs, it can be a good first step toward doing artificial insemination. Once we get comfortable with them, maybe that's something we'll want to look at in the future. There are some downsides, things that need to be considered. One of them is the handling system that you're going to need in labor. You're going to have to run those cows through the chute a minimum of one time, probably at least twice, in order to use these protocols. So that's one thing. If you have a subfertile bull, that problem is going to be magnified because that bull is going to have to breed more cows in a shorter time. And that's the next point on here, more cows in a shorter time. So even if you have a bull that isn't subfertile, if he has normal fertility, it's a concern. We need to make sure that bull's ready for the situation. Bulls that are ready for it, if we're using the right management, I'll show some data as we get going showing that we're likely not reducing fertility by using these programs. Then other negatives, if we were using artificial insemination with this instead of natural service, we would have more options for genetics and what we might be able to bring into our herd. And then if we were using artificial insemination, there's also the ability to use sex semen, and we don't have that with natural service. Going back to a little bit of survey data, if we look at calving seasons, they're in smaller herds, those herds that have between 1 and 49 cows, 64%. So basically about 2/3 of the small cow herds in the country do not have a calving season or no defined calving season. If we look at a little bit bigger herds, there's more of them. There's about 65% that have some defined calving season, whether that's one defined season or maybe 2 or possibly even 3, but they do take advantage of that. And there's a reason for that. And having groups of calves that are similar age can help with marketing. All right, so the other thing to look at, and Alex mentioned it, is that with those calving seasons, shorter seasons mean that we're going to have more calves born earlier in the season. So we're going to have a higher birth weight or a higher weaning weight when we go to get rid of those cows. Here's some data. I think Garth had this in one of his presentations in the past. This is some from Cattle Facts. And when they look at weaning weights, herds that had a 0 to 45 day calving length had a weaning weight on average of 558 pounds. If you stretch that calving interval out to 60 days, that weaning weight on average drops to 544. You get out to 90 days, it drops to 535. By the time you get to 90 plus days, which would basically be your year-round calving, you're down to 511 pounds at weaning on average. So if you start looking at that, the difference between that 45 days and the over 90 days, you're talking almost 50 pounds per calf less. So if you weaned off 20 calves in a year at 50 pounds less, there's 1,000 pounds, and at $1.60 a pound for feeder calves, you might be looking at $1,600 there that you're missing out on. Looking at a shorter calving season, I wanted to put in a little slide here just to give you an idea of the value of each day open. So on average, a calf's going to gain somewhere around 2.5 pounds per day. If we look at the current feeder calf price, just in the ballpark of about $1.60 a pound, take that times the 2.5 pounds per day, that's about $4 per day per cow for each day that we have an extra day open on a cow. It's that much less weaning weight when we get ready to sell. And so if we can do something to shorten up those calving seasons and reduce the number of days open, we can increase the profits that we can make. On the other end of things, other than shortening the days down, being able to have larger groups that are born at a similar time when we go to market them can make a big difference. Now, this example is kind of an extreme, and a lot of people in Ohio wouldn't fit into this, but this was just an example from October 26, 2020. There were 2 groups of steers that were sold at the sale barn. They were very similar in all their management, breeding. One group was just 14 head, and they averaged 588 pounds, brought a $1.50 a pound. The other group was 90 steers, so it was a whole potload, and they averaged 589 on the weight. So 1 pound difference. They brought 164.25 per hundredweight. So the difference in that was $82 per head, just for having a larger size group. And I realize that's probably not realistic for most people in Ohio to have something like that. But Dr. Burdine, Kenny Burdine down in Kentucky had done some work looking over a 7-year span from 2005 to 2012 at prices based on what the lot sizes were when they sold, looking at smaller groups of calves. So on here, you can see that when they had a group of 5 calves compared to selling individuals, they were about $12 a hundredweight higher in their sale price. You add another 5 calves to that, and get 10, and you take it on up to about $15 per hundredweight over selling individuals. So if we can tighten those windows up so we can have more calves that are the same age when we sell them, there's a plus when we go to market those. When we start looking at Estrus synchronization, there's a few key points I wanted to make in here. And one of those is if we look at having a calf every year, which is ideal, a cow is completely capable of doing that. And if we don't do it and take advantage of that, we're kind of losing out on her. So if we take and want to have a calf every 365 days, you'll see on here, I subtracted out 283. 283 is the gestation length. So of the 365, of the 365, she's going to be pregnant 283. That only leaves 82 days to establish a pregnancy and keep that 365-day interval. And then the thing to remember is that they're going to be anestrus for a portion of that, probably on average about 45 days that they'll be anestrus out of that 82. So you're looking at, less than 40 days to get that cow pregnant and stay on that 365-day time frame. These synchronization programs can start non-cycling cows so that they will start cycling. Putting in seeders is one of the methods. Using those seeders, you can put them in at 30 to 35 days postpartum. So after they have that calf, 30 to 35 days later, you can put a seeder in them. If that cow's in good body condition score, we want it to be a 5 or above. Lower body condition score cows just don't respond as well. Doesn't mean that you won't get any of them to respond or get pregnant, but the percentage is going to be lower. Ideally, if we could wait till 45 days, we may get a higher percentage of them that respond to the synchronization, but you can start them a little early and try to get a jump start on them. Next point, if the cow doesn't get pregnant off that first time, so if you start them a little early and they don't get pregnant, there's a pretty good chance that you've started things kind of like the pre-synchronization that Alex was talking about, a little bit different way about it. You can often trigger them so that they'll recycle 21 days later in a natural cycle and have a good fertile heat at that point. And that'll still keep you in that time frame to maintain a 365-day interval. And the last thing I wanted to mention under this is that if you have heifers, you want to make sure they're in good shape if you're going to be synchronizing them, and you want them to be mature enough, typically at least 55 to 65% of their mature weight. Anytime that they're still growing a lot, it's tough on them to get enough nutrients. So we need them to be at least 55 to 65% of their mature weight when we're trying to get them bred. There are factors that can affect the length of that anestrus. So instead of 45 days, it may be longer or it may be shorter. And some of those are, how old is that cow? A 2-year-old is going to be harder to get bred than a 4 or 5-year-old. When your calving season is can make a difference. The presence or absence of a bull, how difficult was the birth they had, what's the health status. The two biggest ones really are what's the body condition score when they calve, and what's the pre and post partum nutrition program for those cows. Because the amount of nutrients that the cow need that go into reproduction, there's a set order on that, and that's listed here. And you'll see on here, we start with number 1. When the cow's eating, the nutrients she's taking in first go to just keeping her alive, her heartbeat and her lungs moving, basal metabolism. Then any extra energy is going to go into activity. If she hasn't finished growing yet, it's going to be used for growth. There's going to be some energy reserves deposited. She's probably going to be lactating, so milk production energy is taken out for that. So we have to get all those satisfied before we have enough energy for them to start having normal cycles and go through the estrous cycle and pregnancy establishment. So you can see it sits down the line a little ways on in order of importance within that cow. So there's all kinds of synchronization programs, protocols out there. Alex showed some of them. You can look them up. Most of the AI companies have them listed. Any of those could be used with natural service. There's a few things that you can do different with natural service. Sometimes we don't need as tight of a window as you would with some of the synchronization programs, especially those that are designed to go with timed artificial insemination. That, if anything, it may be a disadvantage having them sync too tight together when you're having that bull that's trying to get all of them bred. So I'll walk through a couple of your different options here. First one is the simplest one. It's also the cheapest, just giving a shot of prostaglandin. If you have a cow that is cycling, you can give them a shot of prostaglandin, and there's a good chance that if they're in the right point in their cycle, it's going to bring them in heat. If they're not in the right point in their cycle, those that you injected are going to be coming in heat within a reasonable amount of time anyhow. It's kind of the simplest way to do it. You only have to run the cows through the chute once. Disadvantage is if you have anestrus cows, it's not going to help to get those to come into heat likely. And it does not work very well on cows that are your thinner cows that have the lower body condition scores. MGA is an option. It's only labeled for heifers. It is not used a lot in Ohio. If you go to use it, it's a good option, but to buy a bag of MGA is, I think, about $675, and it'll do a whole bunch of heifers, but it's a pretty big expense to put out up front. What the MGA is it's a compound that you mix into feed, so you have to have the heifers at a place where you can get an even amount of feed to them every day for 14 days to get the right amount of the drug into them. Then you have to go another 10 days after that, because during that time period, they may have heats, but they're not going to be very fertile heats. So we wait until that 10-day period's over before we turn the bulls in. So it's something you have to plan ahead. It takes a little effort, but it is fairly inexpensive. I think it's less than about $2 a head to run them through a program like that. The final one we'll mention is using seeders. And if anybody's on here and not familiar with these white T-shaped things, those wings on those fold back, they fit into that blue gun that's on there. You put them into the vaginal cavity, you deposit them. It acts kind of like a bolus gun, pushes it out into there. The wings expand, hold it in there, and it releases the progesterone into the cow. The blue string, or nylon piece or whatever it's made out of plastic that sticks out the back, that's just there for you to have something to grab a hold of to remove it when that it's ready to be pulled. They're very effective on controlling the progesterone level in the cow, and work through doing that. They work pretty well on cows that are not cycling. This is a good option for trying to get something to come back and heat a little bit early. There's a note on here that they can be used twice. I'm not going to get too much into that because there's some research out there that says you can. There's certain ways you need to sanitize them if you use them, but it's also not on the label that they can be used twice. So we don't want to encourage that, I guess. The cons are that you got to run them through the chute to put it in, and you got to run them through the chute to pull it out. And it's also about the most expensive one method to do. These seeders cost about $14 a piece. So just looking at the cost of some of these, so as I just mentioned, the cost of the seeder about $14. If you want to start with a shot of GnRH at the front of putting the seeder in, as Alex mentioned in her protocols, that adds another $1 to $2.25, depending on the drug that you use. There's a little variation. If you use a shot of prostaglandin, it's really not that necessary to use the shot of prostaglandin at the end because they're going to cycle. And if you don't use the shot of prostaglandin with natural service, they're going to be spread out a little bit more. And when they come in heat, so some places actually encourage you not to use the shot of prostaglandin there. But when you start adding up all the costs, depending on what protocol you use, you're going to be looking somewhere between $2 and $17 a cow in your synchronization products. How do you reduce cost? Well, as I mentioned, the possibility of reusing seeders. The other is that maybe you don't synchronize the entire herd. If you have cows that you know are cycling, you may not want to bother trying to do anything with them. You may want to concentrate on those cows that had calves late in the cycle for you. If you need to try to move them up a little bit, this is a good time to do that. Those 2-year-old cows that are harder to get bred, they might be a good option. And maybe if you're trying to get your heifers so they all have calves before your cows really start, that's a good idea. And using synchronization may help you get that achieved. So I'm going to move on to the bull end of things. And I don't know if this, I've got something that popped up on my screen. I don't know if it shows up on yours. Hopefully not. There we go. So on the bull end of things, we need to make sure that we have a good sound bull in order to get these cows serviced. So how many cows can we service with a bull when we're doing these synchronization protocols? Somewhere between 15 and 25 cows per bull. If it's a good mature bull, usually you can get out toward that 25 cows. We want to make sure that bull has a good scrotal circumference. It's suggested that they be 3 years old or older, and I'll show some data on why that is. A body condition score of 6, somewhere in that 5.5 to 6.5 area is good. Don't want them thin, don't want to get them too fat. And a breeding soundness exam, I'm going to talk about that here after this slide, is very important. And also making sure that bull has a high libido. So when we talk about a breeding soundness exam, this is one thing that is definitely underused by a lot of beef producers. It's not that expensive. You can get it done for, it seems like around $75. Some of the stockyards will have days where you can bring a bull in, get a breeding soundness exam done. If you have neighbors that are entering bulls into sales, a lot of those require it, and you may be able to work with them so that while the vet has things set up to do a breeding soundness exam, you can get yours included. So it's definitely something to check into. When they do these, they look at the physical soundness on the bull. That's the first thing. How are his joints? How are his feet? Is he going to be able to move around and get all these cows bred, or is he going to have pain and not be wanting to do it? Reproductive soundness is the next thing. Want to make sure the testicles are in good shape. Want to make sure that he has good semen quality, and we want to make sure that he is able to breed all those cows. So some information from a study that was done on over 2,100 bulls, and this was some work that Dr. Garcia had been involved with. And they found in all those bulls that they had about 22% of them that had at least one physical abnormality. So that could have been maybe just a puffy hock, or it could have been something with, you know, the feet messed up, like an abscess or a corn or something like that. So it's something to be on the lookout for. When they are checking the bull, they're going to do a scrotal circumference. And the scrotal circumference is a really important trait. It's highly correlated to a lot of things. It's surprising when you look at correlations with scrotal circumference, they're a lot higher than a lot of genetic traits when we look at the probability. So like the relationship to sperm production is somewhere between 0.62 and 0.75, high semen quality 0.47 to 0.64. Those are all good high numbers. The two big ones are if you have a bull that has a big scrotal circumference, he's most likely going to have sons that reach puberty earlier and heifers that'll be also reach puberty earlier. So they're going to cycle earlier and they're going to have good pregnancy rates. The actual semen test that takes place, they electroejaculate those bulls to find out. They look at the volume, the concentration, they'll look at the motility. They'll even look at the morphology, which is the shape of the sperm cells in there. And they have to meet certain standards in order to be considered a good breeder. And you'll get a report back that tells you what you can expect. And this was some work also from Dr. Garcia Guerra that looked at if you had a 70% conception rate from a bull, if he was a good breeder, a satisfactory on his scoring, versus one that came back questionable, maybe his semen concentration wasn't quite as high, or his the activity of the sperm wasn't quite as high, he may have a 50% pregnancy rate. So if we look at these pregnancy rates, and I'm having a hard time getting, I can't get a highlighter to pop up on my screen for some reason. So you'll have to live with me, I guess, here. So 28 calves, that's on here in that first column. That 28 calves is 70% of 40 cows. So 28 of them get pregnant in that first service. Then we figure that leaves 12 that didn't. So over the next 21 days, they recycle. About 70% of those get pregnant. That adds another 8 cows pregnant out of that 40. And then you're left with just 4 left. There may be a problem with those. So they're saying just one of those gets pregnant later. You can see each time the calf is going to weigh less. And we added up the total pounds of calf born from that 70%. And it came up to 21,872 pounds. And if the bull only had a 50% pregnancy rate, he's going to have more calves born later. It comes up to 19,614 pounds. When you do the math, the difference in that is going to be about $3,600 worth of calves out of those 40 cows, just based on the, a somewhat lower pregnancy rate. So it's just pointing out why it's important to do those breeding soundness exams. It's important to remember the nutrition of the bulls. The bull has to be in good shape. He's going to be an active animal during that breeding time when you have a number of cows in there all coming in heat at the same time. If he can be at a body condition score 5.5 to 6.5, and he should be adapted to a forage-based diet. So you don't want to pull him straight off of where he's been getting grain and not used to complete forage, and then put him out there on the round bales where that's all he has to eat, or it's not going to help his conception rate. You want to make sure that you're monitoring that bull. If he starts to lose too much weight, he's also going to go down in fertility most likely. So it might be time to replace him if he starts losing a lot of weight. And then give him time to rest when he's done with a group. If you synchronize a group and he's finished the cycle with them, let him get a little bit of rest. Don't move him straight over into another group. When we talked about these bulls, earlier I had put in there about we really would like a 3-year-old or older bull. And here's a little bit of data behind that. Most bulls that are sold in Ohio are really sold as yearlings. And so most of those are about 13 months old when somebody buys them. They want to start using them pretty soon afterwards. So they may be at 14 months old when you turn them out with the cows. There's been a lot of research done that shows about 2/3 of bulls are still mature. So about 1/3 of the bulls aren't completely mature at that 14 months of age. So they're going to be subfertile for you. And if you're trying to use a bull that's younger and maybe he hasn't reached his complete fertility potential at that point. So that's why one of the reasons that it's better to use a little more mature bull if he has several cows to service at the same time. Here's the other reason, this one's really interesting, is they did a study, I believe this was done out of Colorado. They looked at bulls and a yearling bull versus 2-year-old bull versus a 3-year-old bull. The yearling bulls were each given 20 heifers to in their group. The 2-year-old was, I think, 26, and the 3-year-old, I believe, 28 heifers to service. You can see the number of mounts that each of these bulls took, and you can see that even though the 3-year-old bull had more heifers in there with him, he had a lot less mounts on those than what the yearling bull did. Those yearlings are inexperienced. It takes them more services. If we get down to looking at the total number of services, you've got just 40 services for that group of 28 cows, and you got 54 services for the group of 20 with the yearlings. So you can see again, the younger bull's putting out a lot more effort to get his job done. And when we look down here at the overall pregnancy rates on these, you can see that the mature bull, even though he had more heifers in with him, he was able to get a higher pregnancy rate than the yearling age bulls. All right. So to follow along with that, there was another study that had been conducted. And this one looked at synchronized heifers and non-synchronized heifers. So they looked at a 1:16 ratio with synchronized heifers versus a 1:25 ratio. And that's one bull for every 16 versus one for every 25. You can see that they found 28-day pregnancy rate was no different, whether it was 1:16 or 1:25. By comparison, they also looked at bulls that were turned in with non-synchronized heifers and looked at the pregnancy rates on those. You can see those pregnancy rates really don't look different. There actually was a lower pregnancy rate on one group that only had a 1:15 and was non-synchronized than the 1:16 group that was synchronized. But I think overall we can be confident looking on here that with these bulls that somewhere in that 1:16 to 1:25 range, they were still able to service those heifers and get good pregnancy rates at that concentration. So kind of to wrap things up here, just wanted to point some things out. And I guess if there's one message I really wanted to pound home is that synchronization can shorten the calving season, which can be a big benefit because it leaves less days open. We looked at the value of those days open at about $4 per day open. That can add up. And it also can allow us to market larger groups of calves. Even if we only have that average Ohio herd of 17 cows, if we were going to market 15 of those in a year, if we can get a couple of groups of 3 or 4 instead of selling them all as individuals, it can mean some extra money in our pockets. So there's a benefit to trying to shorten that calving season. It also, this one I hadn't mentioned, but by synchronizing these cows and getting so that the cows are on the same stage in their reproductive life and their where they are in pregnancies, it can help with management, both for the cows and for the calves. If those calves are near the same age and the cows are near the same point, it makes feed management a lot easier. We don't have 2-year-olds that are having a calf at one time and an older cow that's 6 months later. It makes it hard to get the right type of feed to those so that everybody can perform well. It also definitely helps out, especially if you have to have a vet come out and do some of your castration work or something else. Having that vet come out there once and be able to take care of a nice group instead of having them with calves spread out over a year can make a big difference. And there's many options for synchronizations. I put up some simple ones just because we don't really need to overcomplicate it. Just having a cedar in for 7 days can be a good start. Maybe putting the shot of progesterone, GnRH, I'm sorry, getting my terms mixed up. Put a shot of GnRH in at the start and do the 7-day cedar, and you don't even need to give them the shot of luteolise or prostaglandin at the end of it. Can be a good way to start out. And finally, hopefully I was able to show a little bit on the importance of why that bull needs to be ready for this, because it is asking a lot from the bull to be able to breed those cows in a shorter time, but they are capable of handling it. Anybody have any questions? I'd be glad to answer them.
Dean, I just had this conversation with the producer Monday. They're trying to tighten their calving group up. And so they were going to utilize synchronization, AI, time AI, everything, and then turn the bull in to tighten things up. Their biggest concern was if they combined AI with synchronization in the bull, they were worried about the cost of per pregnancy with per bull. But, I think there's pretty good data out there that shows about group size. And I think it's going to continue to trend that way, that group size is going to be one of the bigger economic factors.
Yeah, there's been some research showing that if you do that type of thing where you AI them and then turn the bull in after that you can get by with some pretty high ratios of cows to bulls because of the pregnancies you're going to achieve from the AI. And get by with less bulls. And all that depends on the size of your cow herd. You know, somebody with 20 cows, that's a completely different thing than somebody with 100.
Yeah. Alex asked a question. Why do we think there are several farms that do not have a defined calving season?
That's a good question. I think it just ease of management. If you aren't on top of it and you've got the cows out there and they're running with the bull most of the time, you have calves when they're born, and a lot of people just kind of do it that way. I mean, I'm not bad mouthing anybody, but a lot of it's tradition on the way that you raise them, and that's the way that it had been done before. And you put the bull out and you don't worry so much, and you kind of are able to market calves throughout the year and keep a little bit of income coming in at different times. I've heard different people have logic for different ways of doing it.
I think a big reason is they don't have a good place to stash that bull away when they're not using them.
Yeah.
You know, a bull by himself, pretty rough to handle in a lot of instances. Any other questions? I'll go ahead and stop the recording here.